Thank you, everyone who makes everyone's efforts that make this meeting possible. From the board, the teachers, members, and supporters. Appreciate it. Thank you. As Adrian noted, I was originally going to uh, come down in person, but yeah, we have this vehicle to be able to switch to Zoom to be hybrid, and of course this online aspect of practice is something we probably didn't really see coming in as fully as it has, but it's certainly a useful, valuable way to connect, and so good for every time I look around and I see so many people joining from out of state and right. Well, see, France is even. I think I'm assuming in British Columbia right now. So there's people in different states and people in different countries, and that's like the real value of this online connection. Um, I'm conscious that we're working on we're having a series on working with difficult emotions, which when the guiding council when we met and discussed this and decided that this might be a rich area to look at. That sounded like a wonderful idea. And then in preparation for today, I'm like, oh, difficult emotions. That's something very. It's something deep and challenging to look at these emotions with some depth and some clarity. And so I'm grateful to have such rich company, to have had Ian begin so well last week in Ian's inimitable and kind, strong way to teach last week, and then to have the teachers to follow, with having Mary and Yushin, and also Valerie is originally we were gonna end there, but Valerie is gonna continue too. So we're well served with at ICD. To begin, of course, let's start with our bedrock, our fundamental practice, right? Our meditation practice. The greatest teacher of all is the self revealed in stillness. So we give a good period of time for this practice. We'll sit for 30 minutes. So of course, if you haven't done so already, although I see people settled in already, or maybe taking a last drink of water or sip of tea before we settle down, we can do that now. I'm going to do that now. But at the beginning of our meditation, let's be firm in our conviction to really to sit well, to sit all of the way down. What is it to sit well? Well, we have this period of time. How do we best express it? How do we best use this time that we have this 30 minutes? It's enough time to really deeply connect with what is most essential. It's a time to let go of worries and concerns as much as possible, to set the never-ending challenges that are involved in a human life, navigating this mysterious reality that we appear as and walk around in, right? That's always bouncing around between the ears. But as meditation practitioners, we invest time in stillness, in not actively pursuing thought, to not having to solve or scrutinize, to let go. Meditation is a sitting back, sitting down, and a letting go. Let go of everything that we can let go of. There's nothing that you can lose in meditation that you need. There's nothing that needs to be gained, nothing that needs to be lost. It's a matter of allowing all things internally and externally to be as they are. It's an invitation to the self to be as it is. Again, perceived internally, sense of me, perceived externally, sound of birds or traffic. However this life is appearing right now, let's support one another in this practice of allowing, this practice of present awareness, of simple and profound being. It's an extraordinary life. It's an extraordinary way. Meditation is the direct way to realization, to help us glean the most benefit from our sitting practice. Important to have this stable posture, alert without straining, relaxed without getting too relaxed, right? So there's an active balance necessary to be sitting, sit as straight as we can, eyes a little open so we don't become too sleepy or slip into daydream of thinking about this and that. Looking down the length of our nose in front of us with a soft focus to the eyes. We can be sure to soften shoulders where we hold a lot of short-term stress typically. Soft shoulders, hands gathered together in lap, feet, whether we're in a chair or on the ground, firmly planted and in touch with the earth that is holding us up without expectation. And let's bring attention now to our breathing and purposely deepen our breathing with a long inhalation. We help to straighten the back without forcing, crown of the head reaching to ceiling of sky. Deep inhale, and with exhale, let go. Exhale completely without collapsing. And letting go. A deep exhalation. And a few rounds of this deeper breathing to settle in. A helpful anchor for present awareness. I'll strike the bell to begin our sitting practice. We can follow the bell into silence, stillness. Breath awareness is here again as an anchor. Should we wander in the mind, have difficulty, slip into past or future thought streams, the breath is here as a helpful guide, as an anchor for presence. We can return to that if needed. But as much as possible, I invite us all to open to what is here in the mind's eye, whether that's sight, sound, silence, feeling. The shift that is really necessary is, as much as possible, have no preference for the content, whether it's internal or external. Picking and choosing is set aside, and we get on with being directly as we are. Let's please use a moment to stretch our legs. Thank you again for sharing your time, your Sunday afternoon and evening in this way. Whenever these days, particularly when I sit for 30 minutes or so, on the conclusion of that sitting, it feels tempting to remain silent. You know, that wow, can't we just maybe we could just sit some more, and but then the people have invested time and energy, and we have a topic and a web page and an announcement, and that would all go to waste. It wouldn't be a good use of those people's time. Um, but there is the fact that when we sit and enter into being still and quiet, something very profound can occur. A genuine returning and settling down of the body mind, a returning to what is most basic in our nature, and we can really appreciate then the stillness and quiet of just being. It's a wonderful practice. Working with difficult emotions. You know, for myself in the Zen tradition, a lot of my formal training, a lot of the practice that I've done, it doesn't particularly address specific emotions so much. In Zen, the practice is oriented toward an awakening or to the realization, to opening to reality as it is. And implicit in that would be our gaining insight into the nature of emotions and how they function in our life. And I have many books on koans and on Zen, and those of us who've been practicing together for some time will be familiar with some of those koans. And in some ways, it's quite straightforward to pull out a koan and to speak to that principle. But then when we look into emotions, particularly difficult emotions, immediately for myself, I realize, wow, this is a huge area. There's a lot to look into. There's a lot to unpack. There's a lot that can be raised up. Um, I was listening just a little earlier, actually, catching up and listening to Ian's words from last week, who courageously took on shame. You know, and something that he brought up. One of the things he brought up that I appreciated was the quote from the Buddha, where the Buddha says, um, all I teach is suffering and the end of suffering. All I teach is suffering and the end of suffering. And that's always our guide as Dharma practitioners, whatever our particular training or lineage. It's good for me to hear from teachers who have experience and training and insight in other lineages and traditions, because they'll say something new that I right, or I'll hear something said from the Buddha that I haven't heard in a long time or haven't heard before. And what a beautiful, succinct statement that is from the Buddha, that I teach suffering in the end of suffering. So in all of our work in looking at different aspects of our life and practice, always good to bear that in mind, that that is what we are doing. We are letting go of suffering as much as possible, attesting to and honoring the fact, seeing into suffering, and then letting go of as much of that suffering as possible. It turns out, as human beings, a lot of the suffering tends to be self-created, that is actually unnecessary. But as human beings, those of us involved in the human condition, I'm sure, I'm pretty sure you are too, then there is some suffering that is created. Some of it can be let go of. And ultimately, perhaps the Buddha says, all of it can be let go of. But here we are 2,500 years later than the Buddha, and our plate is still full. There's still plenty to do. And in fact, it seems like we get served new helpings every day. I was looking first at this, at love. You know, what a curious word. Um, Poets and songwriters have been hammering away at a definition of love since time immemorial. Right? I went to the dictionary and to the meaning to look at how things are defined, which is something I like to do with words. If we're looking at a particular word, look at the original meaning of the definition closely. I came up with love refers to a deep, tender, ineffable feeling of affection and solicitude. Right? So love refers to a deep, tender, ineffable feeling of affection and solicitude. So then I had to look up what solicitude meant. I wasn't sure about solicitude. And solicitude I saw as a care or concern for someone or something. Now, of course, this is pretty, maybe a surface definition of love that points to the deeper experience of what love is. It uses the words deep and ineffable. There is an ungraspable, undefinable aspect to love, is there not? Isn't it said, you know, it's hard to describe, but when you are in love, but you know it in the heart, you know it in the bones when love is present. I brought up the Buddha, you know, at the beginning here, who in his life, in the way that this is remembered and recorded, it said that he left the palace, left his life of positive conditions and circumstances, jumped the palace wall, and went on a spiritual quest for enlightenment. That is what is popularly remembered and known of the life of the Buddha, or one of the key parts of the Buddha's life. But in so doing, in jumping over the wall and going into the forest, he left behind a wife and child. right? And that is really, that's something not to really to be glossed over. I'm sure he loved them, right? And there was a huge cost in doing so, a huge cost, you know. Nowadays, it also would have been a huge cost, you know, uh, in all kinds of ways where there is support needed. It's like if a family is left in that way. So that's always struck me as something not to be glossed over, that the Buddha, although I'm sure he loved his family, left them to pursue, needed to do that to pursue enlightenment, to pursue practice. Now, in the talks and the teachings and my particular area of focus, which I tend to look at over and over again to delve into, I often look at the teachings of the early Chan masters of China, from like the 5th century, maybe through the up into the 10th century, or even 10th or 11th century. That time, that was also for the most part, a lot of the early teachers, they were home leavers, right? The practitioners for sangha, the early sangha of the Buddha's time, they were home leavers, monks and nuns that cut off ties with family and society, to cut off those attachments, to be able to fully focus on a simple life and the examination of reality in this present experience as much as possible, free from any distraction or attachment. Love certainly contains powerful attachment. For those of us here, I think, I'm not sure if there's anyone who would identify as a home leaver, as has cut themselves off from society and family in order to practice. But I guess if we're fully cut off, we wouldn't have an internet connection or to be able to attend on Zoom. So there is some a little bit of an attachment and a connection there. For those of us who are householders and have been involved in an everyday life in the world, then we are involved in that world of attachment, and where love and hatred and other difficult emotions are constantly arising and being reinforced or changing, coming up over and over again. Perhaps more of the home lever way is to step out of that constant churn as much as possible in order to simplify and look at what's here. And I don't want to devalue or demean that tradition at all. I'm saying for myself, when I look at love and hatred, I am always somewhere involved in love and hatred as a human being living this everyday life. Often love and hatred is described as two sides of one coin, right? Or love and hatred are described as two polarities, like one side and the other side, or two polarities, positive and negative, with an indifference or a non-attachment in the middle there between those polarities or between those sides. So we can look at love and hatred as two sides to one coin in that way. Another way to look at them, if I turn to more of for what I would understand from my own insight, more of a Zen insight or a non-dual insight into love and hatred, then I would say that love is one and hatred is two. As simple and as difficult and as profound as that love is oneness and hatred is two-ness. Now, what do I mean by that? Love is really Let me see. I actually made a couple of notes because this is so meaty, love and hatred. I thought I can't just talk directly from experience. I could, but I felt it'd be. I think I should. I thought I should make some notes here and bring up some things because I'm learning as I go here. And I was looking into love here, and love involving typically involves sacrifice, right? So let's hold that as a thesis. Maybe we could challenge that. But love involves sacrifice, surrendering a possession as an offering. Now, in one definition, like sacrifice, that's one of those tricky words. I read as surrendering a possession as an offering to a god or to a divine being. It's a sacrifice that sometimes have that connotation. But in conversation, Yushin reminded me of a gentleman who was at a Zen center a few years ago, Carlos, who was a wonderful musician and played the flute, uh, very, very beautifully. And he practiced in the a Native American tradition where he learned how to make flutes. He learned how to make flutes from scratch and then play those. And when they would have a meeting and a ceremony in the native people tradition he was practicing in, and they would always sacrifice or offer the very best flute and burn that one. So that's one of those aspects of sacrifice there, which I find more encouraging or palatable than other aspects of sacrificing something to a god or some being, something that is extra. Now, when I say something that is extra, that's really the turn here. If it's loving something or someone, or there's something that is felt that is separate there, then there's some division. Love ultimately is not transactional. It can sometimes appear that way, where it's one loving another, and there's either a conscious or a subconscious expectation of something coming back from that. But that's always still a system of two. It's something that's dual. It's something loving something. When we do that, when we're loved in loving something that is defined, whether it's a person or a thing that is separate, that feels in some degree separate, as we get closer, as we lose ourselves there, as we surrender, it says, in that definition I brought up, surrendering a possession. It doesn't have to be a flute in this sense. We can surrender our own self-interest. Sometimes we do that in love. We surrender our sense of desire or self-interest, what's ours. That's what we give away in order to merge, in order to become one with. Love is becoming one with. Again, if it's with a person or a thing, a country, a way, then there's always some risk. There's a risk with that investment, because anything that appears as a thing or a form or a shape is subject to the great fact of impermanence. But if we looked ultimately at love as being oneness in itself, that is when it is no longer a thing or anything separate at all. There is only love, returning to wholeness, returning to non-separation. And love, of course, can be positively practiced. In the Zen tradition, we talk about, or Bodhidharma, the founder of the Zen tradition, would talk about entering through principle and entering through practice. Entering through principle is awakening to the way things are immediately, seeing things as they are, waking up. It's difficult to enter through principle. We can also enter the way through practice. Now, I've been a practitioner for some years, and many of you here, maybe perhaps everyone here has been a practitioner for some years. Everyone can enter through practice. You can enter both through principle and through practice. So how do we practice? How do we practice love? Again, when we have this sense of self and other, and separation and difference, then it's not possible to fully love there. But in a very practical sense, if we, for instance, we're immersed, we take a walk and we're immersed in nature. If we take a long hike, if we're walking on our favorite woodland path, or our hike in the evening of the desert mountains, as we walk and we're immersed in our environment, through being mindful and present aware, just being presently aware with things as they are, then we open and we become one with that way and that environment. And through opening and becoming one with, then love can be realized. And we find ourselves saying, I love these mountains. Or I love this forest, right? It's not just involved in people or in singular objects, but rather love is opening to the oneness of our life all around us. Love is oneness. So then if we look at the flip side of the other side of this coin, if we use that analogy, hatred is involved in two-ness, or involved in duality, or involved in separation. In my Zen training, toward the end of the formal study of koan training, we look at the precepts, and we look at what's called the three pure precepts. They're quite simple. These precepts are, the first one is cease from evil. Right? And I think, put hatred in there as well. That fits quite well. Let's use that. Cease from hatred. The second one is do good. And the third one is do good for others. One of the early American Zen masters, Robert Aiken, I remember being struck reading some words from him where he said, wow, after all of these years of training, I finally arrived at a teaching that I was told in kindergarten, but it took me 60 years to accept. Which is like, cease from hatred or from evil. You could say, play nice, in kindergarten. Do good for others. Play well with others. A very simple, but a profound teaching. Hatred is a contraction and a separation from others, from other things. I looked up this word too, just for the definition. Hatred is an intense, negative emotional response towards certain people, things, or ideas, usually related to opposition or revulsion toward something. I mean, that's got dualism all over it. right? Intense negative emotion towards certain people. Like most of our difficulty as practitioners is with other people, right? Or I would say with people, including this one here, the sense of me identified self. That relationship to me identified self appears internally as another person. Because we have this kind of like objective relationship to me. We hold it sometimes and comment on me as if it's other, but just held internally. Right? So this sense of other, of something being on the outside. We do that with other people, we do that with things or ideas. And that, again, as Dharma practitioners, we ought to be cautious and have bring real honesty to look at who and what do I hate? Are we free of that? Are we beyond that? I'm not beyond that. I deal with that every day to some degree. Well, hopefully not every day, but maybe every day. At least a couple of times a week. Right? No, every day if I own it properly, right? There is that arising of living in the world, particularly now where it's just pouring in from the phone, from the internet, and from all angles. There's plenty to be upset about. And hatred and a sense of separation is naturally will arise in the human condition. And we're dealing with that towards certain people, things or ideas, particularly if we understand ourselves to be on the side of right or on the side of good. Right, that's a special one for us. That's one for us to really to look out for as spiritual practitioners. Are we identified and on the side of good, which is the opposite to some people who are on the side of bad? If we create that division or opposition, and again that can work on internally with this sense of self here, but if we hold that out there and call it separate, then we've created two. We've created separation, and we've split the world in half. And then hatred and division rears its head, and we've lost oneness, the original oneness of our nature. Now we can practice over and over closing this apparent gap, this gap that opens up in the human way, where we constantly separate. A very efficient and direct way to do that is to sit, is to meditate. That is the active expression of returning to original self and oneness and letting go of separation. Like when we sit, we find all kinds of the way that we describe ourself and other, that we collect and accrue during the day, over the months and over the years, conditioning and ideas that follow us sometimes for generations. This can all be allowed to flow up into the mind's eye in sitting, in meditation. But the active practice there is to cease believing in that or creating further division in the way that we understand reality. To know, to viscerally embody and know that we do not stand separate from anyone, anything, or a single particle in this whole world or this whole universe. That is the experiential fact that can be realized in meditation and in practice, consistent with scientific understanding, consistent to what we know or understand of reality through every lens. That this world is one. This being, this nature, this curious mystery that we're involved in is one in its essence. And the closer that we are able to surrender and merge with our as that oneness, at its basis, its nature is love. That's often, you see, I've seen 100 books in that, just in the spiritual section of Barnes and Noble, in the desert, they'll always claim that at the bottom with awakening there is love and compassion. But for myself, that may be so, but I am very much living my everyday life in the realm of practice, where I am always somewhere in attachment and aversion. I am always somewhere in love and in hatred. I love my family and those around me, and the cats. And when I sat down, I realized the plant. I love this plant. I realized when I sat down, I needed to water it. If I love it, I need to pay attention. Love requires attention. Love requires presence. So love is always functioning in our lives. But the other side, hatred, division, separation, that is always emerging and appearing in our human condition. So we can, with love, it's a positive practice. Yeah, feed those particular seeds, water those plants, let love grow. With hatred, it's a different practice. It's the practice of not. It's of not hating or dividing or separating. And we can do that. We can do that on the cushion in our meditation, and we can do it off the cushion in our everyday life. Seeing the ways in which we describe and hold reality in a fixed way, and seeing the way that we divide and hold ourselves as separate, and always leaning into dissolving that felt sense of separation and allowing connection and non-separation to come forward. And that comes forward naturally. That is actually the basis. Oh, well, I see a question in the chat which I'm going to address. So at that point, yeah, I've said quite a lot there. And I'm going to open it up to question or comment, because I know I'm sure several of you would like to say something. Elise says, can I actually, that was a private message, so I'm going to ask Elise, can I share that, if that's okay? I'm getting a nod. Okay. Please don't tell me that I must stand as one with Mr. Trump, Mr. Putin, Clarence Thomas, etc., etc. I'm going to throw something at you, okay? You are already. You're sharing the same earth. We're walking on the same earth with all of these people, so we are standing as one with them, right? That's one thing. Another one is, I like the quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, where he says, when it comes to love, there is no I. Right? Already when we say I and when we say other, um, we're separating. Although I understand why in this case, so I don't want to be trite either. But I say we have to accept that we do stand, we share we're breathing the same air. We are, and ultimately the only way we heal division and separation and this wild duality that we're living in this society, in this world, is ultimately by coming back together. As difficult and seemingly unlikely as that may sound. At least you did want to respond before I take a question. Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate. All right. Thank you. Thank you all. Maybe I'm going to turn it over to Adrian for any concluding announcements or remarks and about what's coming up. But thank you again.